Hello viewers, like the video and subscribe if you're new here. Let's begin. Story 1. College Horror Story. It all began during my second year of college. The night I moved into the cheapest dorm on campus, West Hollow Hall. A building that looked more like an abandoned asylum than student housing. Its brick walls were water-stained, windows fogged over like breath on cold glass, and the trees around it leaned in, as if trying to whisper warnings. The campus never advertised West Hollow. I only found it listed after midnight on a hidden housing page labeled Overflow. The key wasn't given at the front desk. I had to pick it up from a dusty lockbox under a rusted bench near the woods. When I opened the door to room 306, the air hit me like something exhaled after being trapped for decades, stale, heavy, and strangely warm. There were no overhead lights, only one old lamp that flickered like it was breathing. The second bed was made, but there was no sign of a roommate, just a pair of worn shoes under the desk and a half-full water bottle on the floor. On the bed was a folded note, yellowed and brittle, with a message scribbled in shaky black ink. You can't see him until he sees you. Don't look in the mirror after 3 a.m. A joke, I assumed. Some weird campus tradition to freak out new residents. Still, I didn't unpack. I just sat there, listening to the creaks of the old building settle like bones shifting. That night, at exactly 3:06 a.m., the closet door opened by itself, just enough for me to see the mirror inside. And in that mirror, for a split second, something smiled back at me, but I wasn't smiling. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in bed, heart thudding so loudly I swore it echoed in the hollow halls. Every creak of the floorboards outside felt like approaching footsteps. I kept telling myself it was the wind, the age of the building, maybe even my nerves. But the mirror in the closet door stayed slightly ajar, and no matter how many times I shut it, it would be open again within minutes. By 4 a.m., the shadows in the room seemed darker than they should have been, heavier, like they had weight and intention. I grabbed the folded note again, searching the back for more writing, and noticed a faint red fingerprint smudged near the edge. It wasn't mine. When the sun finally rose, the light barely seeped through the fogged windows, but it was enough to give me the courage to step outside. I went to the dorm supervisor's office to ask about the previous resident of room 306. The moment I said the number, her smile faded. She whispered, "That room's supposed to be sealed. No one's assigned there after what happened in '98. I asked what happened. She stared at me like I should already know. They found him smiling in the mirror, but not in real life. Before I could ask more, she shut her office door, locking it. Back in my room, the mirror had a handprint on it on the inside. I told my friend Jenny. She thought I was stressed, hallucinating, so I invited her to spend the night. She agreed, reluctantly, thinking we'd just joke about ghosts. We played music, laughed, and by 1 a.m., she was already dozing off. I stared at the closet, still jammed shut by the chair. 2:45 a.m. came. I remember, because the power flickered 3 times. Then everything went dead. My watch, my phone, her phone. The room turned ice cold, breath visible in the air. Then came the whisper. From the vent, clear as a whisper in my ear. Asterisk, you left the door open. Asterisk. Jenny sat up instantly. Did you hear that? She whispered. I nodded. My throat was too dry to speak. Then came the sound, dragging footsteps from above, like someone crawling through the air ducts. And then something knocked, softly, on the inside of the closet again. I dare to shine my phone's flashlight toward the door, just enough to see the knob twitch. Jenny started crying quietly, holding my arm as we both stared in silence. The chair moved. I swear to you it slid an inch to the left, all by itself. That's when Jenny screamed, not because of a chair but the mirror. Something was standing behind us in it, tall, pale with a hollowed-out face. I turned around instantly, but no one was there. The room was empty, but the air was heavy, like thick fog had seeped in. Then my phone buzzed once, even though it was on airplane mode. A message appeared. Asterisk, one of you will stay. Asterisk. Jenny grabbed her stuff and bolted from the dorm, crying all the way out. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. Something had locked me in. After an hour of screaming, banging, and panic, the door finally opened. There was no one on the other side. No RA, no other students. Just cold hallway air and a single piece of paper taped to the door. Asterisk, you broke rule number 3. Asterisk, I didn't even know there were rules. But clearly, I had crossed a line. The following night, I stayed at Jenny's apartment. She refused to speak of that night. And when I brought it up, she'd shake and tear up. She ended up transferring a week later, never saying goodbye. I tried to get reassigned, but housing told me my dorm wasn't on record anymore. When I checked the online portal, West Hollow was gone, like it had never existed. Even the maintenance guy I talked to earlier, he wasn't in the staff database. It was like the dorm and everything inside it had been wiped. Except me. I still had the voicemail, the scratches, the nightmares. I started digging, going to the university archive basement, looking for old maps or blueprints. That's when I found a newspaper article dated 1978. Fire at West Hollow kills 4 students. Dorm shut down indefinitely. There was a picture. The building was mine. Same windows. Same closet. They never demolished it. Just bricked it up. Apparently, a seance had gone wrong. They summoned something that wouldn't leave. A survivor had written in asterisk, he only comes at 3 o'clock. He hates being ignored. Asterisk, so who let me live there? And why was my name never in the system? I showed the article to the front office. They said it was fake, that there was no West Hollow on any university property. Then, who unlocked the room for me on move-in day? Who gave me the key? I stood frozen at the doorway, my eyes locked on the mirror. The handprint was unmistakably human-smeared. Fingers spread wide, like someone was trying to push through from the other side. I reached out with shaking fingers, expecting cold glass. But when I touched it, the surface felt warm. I jerked my hand back, heart punching my ribs. My breath fogged the mirror, and for a split second, I saw a face behind mine. Not my reflection, its mouth was open wider than humanly possible. It was smiling, but its eyes, they were bleeding. I screamed and threw the bedsheet over the mirror like a reflex, stumbling back, so hard I hit the door. I didn't unpack anything else. I didn't even bother changing out of my clothes. I slept in the common lounge that night, pretending to study while keeping all the lights on. No one else believed me when I told them what happened. They just laughed, said it was the freshman jitters. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in that room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes like strobe lights in the dark. A thin man crawling backward on the ceiling, flickering like a broken film reel. A voice whispering my name in a language I didn't understand. The worst part was that my phone started glitching only in room 306. Photos I never took appeared in my gallery. One was of me sleeping. The timestamp said 3:06 a.m. Another showed me in front of the mirror, even though I'd never stood there with my phone. In the background, something pale was peeking around a closet. I deleted them all, but they kept coming back. Worse each time, closer, clearer. One night, the face was inches behind me. By week 2, I was spiraling. The sheet I draped over the mirror kept sliding off, even when I pinned it down. And every morning, something new would be carved into the glass. At first, just lines, then words. Look. Once I found the phrase, "You're the key," etched deeply into the center. I brought in a friend, Anna, to show her what was happening. But when she looked into the mirror, it was just her reflection. No carvings, no handprints. Nothing. She looked at me, worried. "You need sleep, dude." That night, Anna stayed over to prove I was imagining it. She slept on the floor beside the bed. By morning, she was gone. Her shoes were neatly by the door. Her phone buzzed with unread messages. But Anna, she was gone. I called her name until my throat was raw, scouring every corner of the dorm, including the basement we weren't allowed to enter. No answer, just the humming of the ancient pipes and something breathing in the dark. Panicked, I checked her phone. One unsent message stared back at me. "It's in the mirror." Then I saw the last thing she did. Her front camera had snapped a photo at exactly 3:06 a.m. In it, she was wide-eyed, pointing at something behind me in the reflection. But when I turned to look, nothing. Just the mirror, now splintered slightly at its center. Security refused to believe me. "She probably went home," they said. "You're stressed." But her parents hadn't heard from her. Her dorm key was still on the floor. And the mirror. It had a new message scratched faintly on the bottom right corner. One word. Next. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the mirror, but I could still feel it watching me. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the walls, every shift in the wind outside, felt like a whisper meant for me. At exactly 3:06 a.m., the mirror made a soft, cracking noise like glass flexing under pressure. I stayed frozen in bed, staring at it from the sliver of space, not blocked by the dresser. My reflection wasn't looking back. It was smiling wide, impossibly wide, and its eyes were completely black. I blinked hard, and my reflection snapped back to normal. But the damage was done. I knew it saw me. The next morning, my door was open even though I swore I locked it. A single muddy footprint led to my bed. No one else was in the hall, and the RA said the cameras hadn't been working last night. I noticed something else too. The word "next" on the mirror had changed. Now it read, "Tonight." I called my mom, trying to sound calm, but the second she heard my voice, she said, "What's behind you?" I spun around. Nothing was there, but I swear the temperature dropped, like I was standing in a freezer. My reflection still smiled, even though I wasn't. That night, I didn't block the mirror. I smashed it, but as the shards scattered, I saw dozens of tiny versions of me, and not one of them looked afraid. Shards of the mirror were everywhere, glinting like tiny glass teeth, but something felt deeply off. Each shard reflected not my current panic, but twisted versions of myself grinning, bleeding, or whispering silently. One shard showed me hunched backward like a broken puppet, mouth gaping in a soundless scream. Another showed me pulling something shadowy from the wall, something long, thin, and moving. I stumbled back, shaking, but the reflections kept moving without me, synchronized like they were performing a ritual. Then they all froze, every image locking eyes with me at once, and their mouths moved in unison. "You let him out." A gust of cold air slammed into the room, and the lights exploded, literally bursting, glass raining around me. From the darkest corner behind the shattered mirror, something began to crawl out, slow, deliberate, joint by joint. It wore my skin, but its eyes were deep black, endless and hungry. Before I could run, my phone buzzed on the floor, screen cracked and flickering. One final message appeared. "You've replaced the mirror. Now he reflects you." I didn't scream, I couldn't. The breath left my body the moment its hand, identical to mine but gray and veined, touched the edge of the mirror frame. Its fingers curled around the wood with an unnatural crackling sound, like dry branches snapping under pressure. As it stepped out, I noticed it wasn't walking, it glided, feet inches above the floor, trailing a shadow that moved the opposite direction. Every step it took caused the room to shift subtly. The posters on my wall melted, the air turned syrupy, and my heart pounded like tribal drums. I backed away, clutching the nearest object, a desk lamp, but it flickered violently, then went dark in my hand. It tilted its head, mimicking my nervous tick, and let out a quiet, gurgling laugh, like water bubbling up from a clogged drain. Somewhere behind me, the door slammed shut on its own, locking with a deafening clang. The copy opened its mouth, wide and unnatural, revealing a pitch-black void filled with whispering voices. They weren't in English, they weren't in any human language, but they made my bones hurt. Then it spoke, just once, in a hoarse voice. "This body is borrowed. Yours is next." The walls began to bend inward. The ceiling dipped as if the room itself was being swallowed. I closed my eyes and prayed to wake up, but this was no dream. This was a summoning. Suddenly, the lights came back on, but everything was wrong. The room looked like mine, but the walls were too smooth, too clean. There was no dust, no posters, no life. It felt like a replica built by something that didn't understand how humans lived. I turned to the mirror, now fully intact, but my reflection wasn't there. Instead, the shadow version of me stood in my place, waving slowly. I backed away, heart racing, and my phone buzzed again, somehow still in my pocket. The screen showed one app, just one I'd never downloaded before. Rules for Escape. When I tapped it, the screen glitched, flashed red, and a message appeared. "Do not look at him. Do not run. Do not scream." My blood ran cold. Behind me, I heard a low growl, not like an animal, something deeper, ancient. I turned anyway, because I could not look and saw nothing but black smoke pooling in the corners of the room. But from within the smoke, I saw glowing red eyes open, first 2, then 4, then 6. The copy began to twitch violently, its joints snapping and twisting into new shapes as it dragged itself toward me. The mirror flickered, showing flashes of other people, other rooms, other victims. I was trapped in a haunted simulation, and the thing wanted to wear me like a mask. Desperate, I hurled myself at the wall where my bedroom door used to be, but it was solid, cold stone. No handle, no hinges, just a flat, wet surface that pulsed slightly under my touch, like it was breathing. The phone buzzed again. "You have one chance. Say your true name, out loud." I didn't understand what that meant. My name was my name, wasn't it? But something in me remembered. A voice, not mine, rose up from my throat, whispering a word I hadn't said since childhood. Something I was called in dreams. The air trembled. The shadow creature stopped moving, and let out an ear-piercing screech. It clutched its head and split open, not with blood, but light blinding and golden. Like the sun through a broken stained glass window, the mirror shattered once again, and the smoke was sucked back inside, howling and clawing the floor. I collapsed, gasping, as the room morphed back to normal dusty posters, half-eaten snacks, the hum of my laptop. Had it worked? Was I back? My phone lay still on the floor, the rules app gone. I crawled to the window, opened it to feel real air, and let the rain soak my face. But across the street, in the reflection of a car mirror, it was still waving. I didn't sleep that night or the one after. I duct taped every mirror, every reflective surface in my dorm, even my laptop screen. But something still felt wrong. Every time I turned my back, I heard faint tapping, like fingers gently brushing glass. My reflection had stopped mimicking me. When I scratched my head, it stared. When I looked away, I felt its smile. By the fourth night, my roommate vanished, just gone. No signs of a struggle, except her shattered compact mirror on the floor. The school called it a mental health episode, but I found her phone under her bed. The screen was still lit, showing a red app. Mirror pass. That night, I saw my reflection step back on its own, shrinking into a dark hallway that didn't exist behind me. It whispered something through the glass I couldn't hear, but my ears bled anyway. I tried smashing the mirror, but the shard still showed my reflection smiling in every single piece. Then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., my brand new phone turned on by itself. One app, one notification, he's in. I turned slowly toward the closet door, which had creaked open an inch. A slow breath echoed from inside. Then, in the mirror above my desk, my reflection raised a finger to its lips and mouthed, "Don't scream." The closet door swung open and the lights went out. Story 2. The College Professor. You ever walk into a place that feels like it remembers pain? That's what room 313 at Redwood University felt like from the moment I stepped into the humanities building. I wasn't even supposed to be near that part of campus security had the West Wing sealed off after some mysterious fire decades ago. But every Thursday night, without fail, a flickering light would buzz behind the cracked door of room 313, and someone tall, thin, and dressed like time forgotten would enter. Always right at 3:13 a.m. No sound, no footsteps, just the sense that something old and intelligent was moving behind that door. People said the room was cursed, that students who investigated it went missing, or, worse, came back wrong. I laughed it off until the night I saw my own name written on the fogged window, scrawled backward from the inside. That was the same night the door opened on its own, and I stepped into a classroom that had been dead since 1987, yet somehow still waiting for me. The air inside was wrong. It wasn't cold, it was hollow, like breathing inside a tomb that hadn't been opened in years. The walls, yellowed with age and stained with something I didn't want to guess, were covered in faded student essays pinned with rusted tacks. Only the dates made no sense. 1976, 1951, 1924. But they all had one name signed at the bottom. Professor Lyle. I'd never heard of him. No one on the faculty list matched that name. At the front of the classroom stood an old chalkboard, cracked like skin, with equations scribbled in a language that slithered out of my brain the moment I tried to read it. Then I saw the desk. My name was carved into the wood freshly. The moment I blinked, a loud screech echoed behind me, like chair legs dragging across tile. though no chair had moved. And I swear, I heard someone whisper, "You're late." My hands were shaking, but I couldn't turn back now. Something had seen me, and it was expecting me to stay. I crept back inside, heart racing, expecting a prank or maybe a squatter. But the room was empty, just the blackboard, except this time. It had something written in long, slanted letters. "Sit. Class is in session." The lights snapped off, leaving me in total darkness. I reached for my phone, but the screen glitched, flickered, and died. My ears started ringing, then came a voice. Slow, gravelly. "Late again, Mr. Holloway." I swear it came from behind the walls. Cold fingers brushed my shoulder. I screamed and stumbled back, hitting a desk. The chalk started moving again by itself, writing my name, then underlining it again and again until it screeched. I bolted for the door. This time, it opened, but I had to shove it with all my weight, as if something didn't want me to leave. Back in my dorm, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, or maybe a hallucination. But the bruises on my shoulder said otherwise. And worse, my name on the board hadn't been wiped off. The next night, I found a printed syllabus in my backpack. I never put it there. It was dated fall 1987. The course, Theoretical Finalities 301 Instructor, Professor M. A. Draus. No one had heard of the course. The department head said Draus had died during a lecture in 1987, burned alive when the podium somehow caught fire. The file was sealed. When I asked for access, I was told I'd already checked it out last week. But I hadn't. Someone had. Using my ID. At 3:13 a.m., everything escalated after that. I began to hear the lecture, not just in my head, but through speakers, walls, even in my dreams. A droning, ancient voice talking about resonance frequencies, dimensional echoes, and sacrificial education. I started missing time. I'd wake up in front of room 313, covered in chalk dust, hands shaking, and worse, people were beginning to forget me. My roommate didn't recognize me. Professors claimed I wasn't enrolled. My emails started bouncing back with unknown recipient. Something was erasing me, just like the students in those old blue books, each one marked absent for final session. I was becoming one of them, a name in a forgotten course, a face no one remembered, a student of a dead man. I tried to leave campus, packed my things, booked a flight, but the cab never came. When I tried to walk, the campus seemed endless, looping in on itself. Every road bent toward the humanities building. No matter how far I went, I ended up at room 313. Once, I screamed for help in the cafeteria and no one even looked up. It was like I'd been phased out of reality. Then the messages began appearing on my door mirror. Attendance is mandatory. Blood, red handwriting. But when I touched it, it felt cold, like fog on glass. The final message read, "See you at the exam." After that, my reflections started lagging just slightly, but enough to know it wasn't really me anymore. The exam was scheduled for midnight, Halloween night. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I returned to room 313, this time bringing my phone, a flashlight, and every ounce of courage I had left. The room looked different now, newer, as if it had reverted to the night of the fire. Students sat in rows, unmoving, their eyes hollow, their hands twitching as they scribbled on endless exam sheets. I recognized some of their faces from missing person posters in the library basement. At the front stood Professor Draus, skin waxy, eyes black. He welcomed me with a nod. Late again, Mr. Holloway, but we're always willing to grade on a curve. Then he handed me a paper blank except for one question. Would you stay to learn forever? I didn't answer. I dropped the paper and tried to run, but the floor stretched, pulled away from me like a conveyor belt. The students turned their heads in sync, watching me with broken necks and rotted smiles. The door slammed shut on its own. Drow stepped off the podium and walked straight toward me. Dragging something behind him, a flaming lectern chained his wrist. The fire didn't burn him. It hissed and whispered names. My name. I curled into a corner, crying, until he stopped inches away and offered a pen. Sign and you pass, he said. Refuse and become the lesson. My hand trembled. The fire reached out, wrapping around my ankle. I screamed, but no sound came out. I sprinted down the hallway, heart pounding like it was trying to rip out of my chest. But the corridor stretched longer with every step I took. Doors on either side of me slammed open and shut violently on their own, each one revealing a flash of something wrong. A lecture hall filled with rows of corpses taking notes. A student slowly turning to dust mid-scream. A black-eyed version of me staring back from inside a shattered mirror. The flickering overhead lights buzzed louder, almost like they were whispering some grotesque chant. My phone screen lit up in my pocket, but I never took it out. It started playing a voicemail from an unknown number. It was my voice, pleading, "Don't go into room 103. Don't look at the ceiling." Just then, the floor beneath me groaned like it was breathing. I looked up and immediately regretted it. Hundreds of hands were crawling out of the ceiling tiles, reaching down with claws that weren't human. I screamed as one brushed against my shoulder, freezing my skin to the bone. The hallway lights all went out at once, plunging me into a silence so complete it rang in my ears. In the pitch-black hallway, I stood frozen, too scared to breathe, afraid the slightest sound would draw them closer. The silence was broken by a faint, rhythmic clicking, like nails tapping glass. It echoed from every direction, getting louder, faster, closer. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but the screen was cracked, distorted, and refused to turn on, only showing a blinking message. "You're not alone." That's when I felt it, something cold and wet slithered across my ankle. I bolted forward blindly, hands scraping along the walls for a door, any door. One appeared, room 103. My breath hitched. That was the room from the voicemail. Against all logic, I grabbed the handle. It was warm, too warm, like something breathing on the other side. I opened it anyway. Inside, the professor stood by a chalkboard, writing furiously, but the words were backwards. And his head was turned completely around, staring at me while his hand kept writing. "You broke the rule," he said, voice gurgling. "Now class is in session forever." I staggered backward, but the door slammed shut behind me with a bone-rattling boom. The lights flickered and bathed the room in a sickly green hue. The professor's hand kept scribbling across the chalkboard, but now the chalk bled red, like each letter carved open the board itself. I couldn't understand the writing. It was in some language that twisted the eyes to look at it. My ears rang with an eerie hum, growing louder with each stroke. Then he stopped. Slowly, the professor raised his finger and pointed directly at me. The room stretched, warped walls bending like rubber, desk legs twisting like roots. "You're enrolled," he hissed, and suddenly the students began to materialize. But they weren't alive. Hollow faces, eyes stitched shut, each wearing the same college hoodie I had on. One by one, they turned their heads toward me, and I realized they weren't standing, they were floating. I ran for the door, clawing at the knob, but it dissolved in my hands like ash. I don't remember how I escaped room 103. 1 minute I was surrounded, screaming in a classroom that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the next I woke up on the campus lawn. Morning light, birds chirping. My phone had 17 missed calls, all from an unknown number. I rushed to the admin building to report what happened. The woman at the desk blinked when I mentioned room 103. That wing was demolished 5 years ago, she said flatly. It's just rubble now. I ran back to the hall. Sure enough, there was nothing but a boarded-up doorway where the hall should have been. But on the wood, fresh chalk marks my name written over and over again. I tried to leave town that day, but my car keys were gone, and the nearest bus station was abandoned. That night, I stayed at a motel, lights on, TV blaring to drown out the silence. But when I checked the bathroom mirror, something was written across it in fog. Class is still in session. And then came the knock at the door. The knock wasn't loud, it was soft, rhythmic, almost polite. But that made it worse. It repeated 3 times, then paused, like whoever was outside was waiting for something or someone. I grabbed a metal lamp from the nightstand, tiptoeing toward the door, heart thundering in my ears. The peephole showed nothing, just darkness, no hallway lights, no shadows, not even the flicker of the motel's neon sign. I turned to the window to escape, but it too was blacked out, as if the entire world had been erased. Another knock, this time from the closet. I spun around in panic. I hadn't opened it since checking in. Slowly, I crept toward the door and pulled it open with trembling fingers. Nothing inside, except a single folded paper sitting on the floor. I unfolded it, expecting nonsense, but what I saw made my stomach drop. It was a copy of my student ID, stamped with the word probation. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I huddled in the corner with every light on. Every hour, the mirror fogged over again, each time with a new word. Attend. Return. Obey. I left the motel at first light, walking miles until I reached a small diner on the edge of town. When I asked for directions out of the county, the waitress's smile vanished. You one of Professor Redding's kids? She asked quietly, eyes narrowing. He used to teach at the university before the fire. I pressed her for details, and she finally whispered, Room 103. That's where they say it all started. Rituals, disappearances. The school covered it up. But you're not the first to come back changed. I left before she said anything more. My appetite gone. I didn't want to know how many others like me were out there. I just wanted out. But every road I took circled back to the university. It was like the town had wrapped around itself. Back at campus, my dorm was empty. All the doors in the hall were open. Every room completely cleaned out except mine. I found something new, waiting on my desk, a syllabus. Fall term, it read. Underneath was a list of students. I recognized every name. They were the ghostly faces I'd seen floating in room 103. And at the very bottom, a new addition. You. My vision blurred. The lights buzzed overhead. The chalkboard in my room, one that hadn't been there before, began to write on its own, scrawling the same words over and over again. No one skips class. I bolted for the front exit, but it led to a corridor I had never seen before. The walls stretched endlessly, doors lining both sides. From behind each door, Whispers bled through, calling my name in unison. I ran, turning corners, climbing stairs that shouldn't exist, until I reached a tall iron door marked Final Exam. The moment I touched the handle, my body froze. A cold wave coursed through my veins, like every cell knew what lay beyond. I pushed open the door, and there he was, Professor Redding, sitting behind a desk in a pitch-black classroom, eyes glowing faintly beneath cracked spectacles. "You're late," he said without looking up. I tried to speak, to scream, but my voice was gone. He motioned to the desk in front of him, and suddenly I was no longer standing, I was seated, pencil in hand, a blank test in front of me. Questions formed by themselves, one after another. Not in English, not in any language I knew, but I understood them somehow, and I knew there were no right answers. Every wrong response made the walls pulse, made shadows rise from the floor like smoke. Then I heard them again, the other students. This time they weren't silent. They were crying, begging me not to finish. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember finishing the test. I don't even remember the final question. But I remember waking up on the cold, wet tiles of the basement beneath the campus library, surrounded by desks covered in names scratched deep into the wood. My name was the newest one. Blood ran from the letters. The air was thick, rotting, and filled with whispers. A pale, disjointed figure stood in the corner, wearing Professor Albrecht's suit, but its face was mine. Its jaw unhinged with a sickening crack as it smiled and whispered, "You passed." I stumbled to my feet, but the walls were now covered in pages of my exam, all written in a language I've never learned, yet somehow knew. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One new notification, * midnight lecture, attendance mandatory. * then the lights flickered, and dozens of faceless students turned toward me, standing silently at invisible desks in the dark. As one, they lifted their hands and scratched at their own names on their skin, whispering, "Join us, Professor." Behind me, Albrecht's voice, my voice, chuckled, "Your tenure now." My scream was swallowed whole by the lecture bell, which rang 12 times, but echoed like gunshots. The door vanished behind me. The final lesson had begun. Story 3, College Student Horror. It all began with a letter that didn't belong, no stamp, no return address, just slick black paper that shimmered under the light like oil. My name was etched on the front in jagged silver ink, like it had been carved instead of written. Inside, a message. "You've been accepted into Croridge University. Full scholarship. Arrival mandatory." I had never applied, never even heard of the place. Still, something sharp and cold inside me pushed me to go. The campus was deep in the Oregon wilderness, unreachable by normal roads. My GPS spun in circles before dying completely. The last half mile, I drove through fog so thick it felt like drowning. As the gates creaked open on their own, the temperature dropped. The sky over Croridge was the wrong shade of gray, unnatural, heavy. The buildings weren't built. They looked like they'd grown out of the rock. I felt watched before I even got out of the car. And above the gate, carved in weather-worn stone, was a phrase, "Knowledge is a sacrifice." My dorm room was in Holloway Hall, the oldest building on campus. It creaked constantly, even when the air was still. The walls were yellowed and damp, and I swear the wallpaper pulsed when I wasn't looking directly at it. On the first night, I found a note under my pillow. It wasn't there when I checked in. It read, "Do not look outside after 1:11 a.m. Do not answer knocks after 2:03 a.m. if you hear breathing under your bed. Pretend to sleep. I laughed, thinking it was some prank by upperclassmen. That night, I stayed up, trying to prove it was all a joke. At exactly 1:11 a.m., the wind died. The trees stopped moving. I looked outside. There were people, no, things standing in the quad. Motionless, staring up. All of them had my face. The next morning, the RA was gone. His room was wide open, lights flickering, a strange red stain trailing into the floorboards. No one talked about it. No emails. No cops. It was like he never existed. I asked another student, Emily, from down the hall what happened. She just smiled and said, "The walls take what they want. That's why we follow the rules." I asked her what rules she meant. She just looked over her shoulder and whispered, "You'll learn. Hopefully not the hard way." That night, I taped over my windows and stuffed towels under the door. I wore earplugs to bed. Still, at 2:03 a.m., I heard 3 knocks. Then a slow whisper, "Let me in. Let me in. Let me wear your skin." I didn't sleep. I just lay there, heart pounding, praying for daylight. Things escalated fast. On my 4th day, I saw someone walking backward on the ceiling in the library. No one else reacted. A girl in the study room smiled at me, her teeth too long, her mouth stretching too wide. I found a textbook with no words, just blinking eyes on every page. I stopped eating at the cafeteria after I saw something moving in the soup, something that blinked and had tiny human fingers. One student screamed during a lecture and clawed at her face until campus security dragged her out. We never saw her again. The professor just smiled and said, "Some minds break easier than others." I started recording everything, but when I played the audio back, all I heard was whispering in a language that made my ears bleed. I tried to leave. I packed my bags and ran to the parking lot. But my car was gone, along with the road. There was only thick forest beyond the iron gates, which were now welded shut. I asked a faculty member for help. She placed a cold hand on my shoulder and said, "Leaving is a graduation requirement. You haven't passed yet." I began to question reality. My reflection didn't match my movements. Shadows moved on their own. I'd look away from my notes for a second, and they'd rewrite themselves in that strange language. I failed a test I never took. I got detention for a class I wasn't in. The bell tower rang at night, but there was no bell, just screaming. On the 7th night, something entered my room. I didn't see it. I just felt the air grow heavy and smelled burnt copper. The bed dipped beside me, even though no one was there. I held my breath. I couldn't move. The whispering returned. "You shouldn't have come here. You were chosen, not accepted." I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was morning, but my roommate was gone. Her half of the room looked as though no one had ever lived there. Her name disappeared from the dorm registry, but I remembered her. Her laugh, her hair. I tried to report it, but campus security said, "We don't track phantoms." Then handed me a mirror that wasn't reflecting anything at all. Classes turned bizarre. One professor taught anatomy by carving open what looked like a goat-headed child. Another asked us to read aloud from books that made several students vomit uncontrollably. There was a test held in a pitch-black room. They told us to write with our fingers. When I turned in the paper, my hands were covered in blood, and I didn't know whose. The next day, no one mentioned the test. I stopped trusting anyone. Students began disappearing one by one, but their rooms were always spotless. The memory of them blurred, like dreams I couldn't fully remember. I tried calling home. The line only echoed with static and the sound of my mother crying, but she died 5 years ago. I started seeing figures in the mirror's versions of me, grinning wider and wider with each glance. I stopped looking. One day, I found a door in the basement labeled, "Do not enter under any circumstances." So naturally, I entered. Inside was a spiraling stairwell that led down, much farther than it should have. Hours passed. At the bottom, a massive room filled with stone desks, rotting books, and hundreds of students all staring blankly into nothingness. At the far end, a massive blackboard where someone had written, "Knowledge is the cage. You are the key." I fled, but the stairs behind me had disappeared. Something was chasing me. I could hear it breathing, feel its claws scraping the walls. I blacked out before I escaped. When I awoke, I was in the infirmary, but the nurse had no eyes, just deep. What holes that watched me anyway? "You went too far," she said. "You've seen too much. Now it sees you." I begged her to let me go home. She only smiled and fed me soup with chunks of raw meat. My roommate, another new one, was now a man named Felix, who never blinked and muttered in his sleep. At night, I saw smoke rising from cracks in the floor. The whispers came back louder now, chanting, calling me by name. Something was awakening and it wanted me. I stopped dreaming. I stopped sleeping. I felt something inside me cracking, like my mind was peeling open layer by layer. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, not the sweet, nervous girl from before, but the pale, wide-eyed version of her. Mouth stretched open in a silent scream, pupils like pinholes. I tried telling myself it was a nightmare, that I was sleep-deprived or stressed, but then I heard it scratching, not from outside, but under my bed. I froze, too terrified to move. The scratching turned into a low, wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across tile. My heart thumped so loudly, I thought it would give me away. Slowly, I leaned over the side of the bed. Nothing, just cold air and shadows. But when I sat up, my closet door was open. It had been shut all night. Hanging from the inside handle was a strip of torn flannel identical to what the girl had been wearing the night she vanished. Scribbled on the inside of the closet wall, in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Don't ignore the warnings." I couldn't breathe. The room felt colder than it should have been, like I had stepped into a freezer. My breath came out in faint, misty clouds, and yet, sweat dripped down my back. I grabbed my phone to call anyone, but the screen flickered violently and then went black. That's when the scratching started again, this time louder, angrier, circling the bed, like whatever was underneath wanted me to know it wasn't finished. I leapt up and ran for the light switch. Nothing. Dead. My dorm lights were always faulty, but never like this. As I backed up toward the door, I heard something whisper my name right in my ear. No one was behind me. I bolted into the hallway, only to find it pitch black, like the entire dorm had been swallowed by darkness. Then, from down the corridor, I saw her. The girl, standing, swaying slightly, eyes glowing faintly red, and behind her dozens of others, silent, watching, waiting. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me had vanished, swallowed by a wall of black, like ink bleeding across reality. My legs trembled. My body screamed to flee, but the air had thickened, slowing me down as if I were moving through water. The girl took one step forward, her face twitching in unnatural, jerky spasms, mouth stretching too wide, eyes unblinking. The crowd behind her followed, gliding, not walking closer, their faces a blur of screaming mouths and hollow eye sockets. I slammed myself against the nearest door, begging it to open. It did, but not into a room. It opened into something else, something wrong. A forest at night. But every tree was made of bone, and the sky blood red. I looked back one last time. My dorm, the hallway, the students gone. The door behind me slammed shut. I was alone in this hellscape that breathed and watched and whispered. And on the wind, I heard my name again. But this time, it came from right behind me. I turned around sharply, my breath caught halfway up my throat. Something had moved. I was sure of it. Not just the breeze, but a deliberate shift, like a figure ducking just out of view. The air grew dense, like invisible hands were pressing against my chest. Every sound, my heartbeat, my breath, even the rustle of leaves was muffled, as if I were underwater. I stepped backward, eyes darting between the skeletal trees, but the forest twisted around me like it was alive, reshaping paths I'd already walked. Then came the smell, sickly sweet, like rotting fruit and scorched hair. I gagged as something snapped behind me aloud. Clean crack, like a tree branch breaking under weight. I spun, and there was a silhouette the size of a man, but horribly wrong. It was hunched, elongated, with joints that bent the wrong way, and a head that tilted far too far, as if it had no spine. The rain had stopped, yet I could still hear, dripping soft, rhythmic, and too close. Then I saw it. Black ichor falling from its fingertips, burning holes in the bone-covered ground. And it was smiling. The thing didn't move. It stood watching, if it even had eyes. Its skin, or what passed for it, was stitched together like old leather, twitching with each breath it took. I backed away slowly, trying to make sense of where I was, but the forest bent and curved around me like a labyrinth. The thing began humming, no, not humming, chanting, low, guttural syllables that made my skin crawl. With every word, the trees groaned like they were alive and in pain. I stumbled, falling against a bony trunk that shuddered under my weight, and hundreds of faces blinked from beneath the bark. All of them were college students, some from my school, some I remembered going missing months ago. Their mouths opened in a silent scream before melting back into the tree. The creature moved again, this time toward me. I ran, feet pounding through a path that hadn't been there a second ago, praying it led anywhere but here. I kept running. I didn't care if it was a loop, a trick, or a trap. I just needed to move. Branches grabbed at me like fingers, slashing my arms, leaving warm, wet trails of blood. I heard footsteps, several sets. Not from behind me, but above. I glanced up. Dozens of things crawled across the treetops, pale. Child-sized humanoids with hollow sockets and jaws that stretched to their chests. They chatter like insects and mimic my cries for help, repeating them in my voice. I stumbled into a clearing where the air shimmered like heat waves. In the center was a chair made of bones, and sitting in it was me, or something that looked like me. Same clothes, same blood on the arms, but its face was all wrong, grinning ear to ear. Even though its eyes were gone, it pointed behind me slowly, and I turned only to see the original girl from the dorm. She wasn't alone this time. Every face from that hallway was now watching me from the tree trunks. I tried to scream, but my voice felt locked somewhere deep in my chest, as if the thing in front of me had stolen it. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and with every movement, its limbs made a sound like wet fabric tearing. My legs wouldn't move. My mind begged me to run, but my body was no longer mine. Its eyes, if they were eyes, opened like slits across its face, glowing a faint, pulsing red, as if they beat with my own heartbeat. Then it spoke not in words, but in a vibration inside my skull, like a swarm of hornets buzzing behind my eyes. "You stayed too long." It hissed in 1,000 overlapping voices, none of them human. The trees around us began to close in, bending unnaturally, as if drawn toward the thing like iron to a magnet, just as its hand reached toward my face. Something yanked me back into the darkness. I tumbled, hit the ground, and scrambled backward, panting, shaking, bleeding. But when I looked up, the forest was gone. I was back in my dorm room, soaking wet, the sheets torn and stained with mud. I turned to the mirror. My reflection wasn't mine. It smiled, and behind the glass, I saw trees.